So we're going to wrap up our series here on running the race. Our metaphor for today is not necessarily a sports metaphor, but it does fall in line with those things as we look at Ecclesiastes chapter 4. You think about God's design for our lives. You can probably think about your own life and the way that you live it, not just spiritually, but physically, whether we're at work, at home, in the family, out and about, in leisure, or in the church. God has designed for us to live our lives as a journey, and not just with other people. We are relational people, but He has designed us to walk that journey with other believers as a team, so that we can labor for God's kingdom, and so that labor can also be most effective and most efficient. Joys just aren't the same if you don't have someone to share them with. Struggles are more difficult to go through when you don't have a partner to walk through them with. And so we're designed to be with people who will encourage us, not just to be positive and encouraged, but to be Christian, to find different ways in which the way we celebrate, the way we mourn, the way we grieve can be a witness and a testimony to the God we serve. And when you think about athletics, there's a lot of sports that's like, oh, that's not a team sport. There's a lot of individuals competing in and of themselves. But even competitions where an athlete doesn't have a team immediately surrounding him on the court or on the field or on the mat, where it really seems to be one-on-one, what we understand about athletics is they're never on their own. They have coaches, they have other people, they have maybe nutritionists, they have people who are working with their physical training regimen, and they have family and they have friends who are supporting them. And so even though they might be competing solo, they are never they're never alone. They're never in a place where they are completely by themselves. There's always people around them who will continue to encourage them and strengthen them and lift them up in that arena that they are in. And so teamwork is so important. And even in team sports, we are witnessing some things in college football these days that, if half of your team is competing well, you can still lose. If your offense can score like nobody's business, but your defense can't stop anybody, you're only as good as the weakest link on your team. And sometimes the stronger aspects of the team can come and elevate the performance of the weaker aspects of a team. But ultimately, as a part of a team, we're all responsible for our participation in what goes on. The same is true for us in the church, that we have to be committed to the team in order for us to be most effective and most efficient in the way we are serving the kingdom. Ecclesiastes chapter 4, verses 9 through 12 says this: "Two are better than one, because they have a good reward for their efforts. For if either falls, his companion can lift him up. But pity the one who falls without another to lift him up. Also, if two lie down together, they can keep warm. But how can one person alone keep warm? And if someone overpowers one person, two can resist him. But a cord of 3 strands is not easily broken." And so this passage is often used and quoted at weddings, but the truth of this passage applies to all of us. It includes relationships that are far beyond marriage. And from this passage, we learn the importance of being in genuine relationships with others. That rather than living life in isolation as the body of Christ, we need each other to fulfill the mission of the church. And so ultimately, we realize that God's intention are for us to journey in life together, to partner with one another in the things that are going on and the things that we will do. And you think about what it is to be in the body of Christ, that as people who are in the body, as different parts of the body, we all have different unique gifts. Some of you, I've mentioned before, some of you are great encouragers. And you use that gift in a way that is powerful and effective. And if you weren't an active part of this body, I would not be able to do my job. Because the ways in which you give me encouragement, give me the ability to continue to press on. Because we don't all have that gift of encouragement. If I'm honest with you and with myself, encouragement is something that I have to be very, very intentional and I have to seek out, because my attitude is probably a little more critical than it should be. That critical thinking is also important, though, because it's the criticism and the critical thinking that allows us to grow, that allows us to recognize when maybe we were less right than other times. I don't want to say wrong, because I don't ever want to be wrong. But the truth is, sometimes I am wrong. And if it weren't for people who were critical and thinking critically and maybe bringing some constructive criticism, we might just flounder around in that same pool of wrongness. And so it's important for us to have encouragers, for us to have critics. It's important for us to have people who will serve who can bake and who can cook and who can supply food. It's important to have people who can preach and teach and sing. It's important to have people who can work with our children. It's important to have people who can organize and who can manage crowds and who are just simply willing to just serve and work. Every aspect of the body brings us to this place where we work as a team. Solomon, or the preacher, begins this passage by stating 2 are better than 1 in verse 9. God never meant for you to fly solo. God never meant for you to walk through life alone. Right? And that doesn't mean that you have to be married. That doesn't mean that you have to always have a boyfriend or girlfriend. What that means is he meant for you to be a part of his people. He meant for you to be an active part of his body, of his bride, to walk through life together. Acts chapter 2, we see the way the early church worked in these things. He says this. He says, and they devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to the fellowship and to the breaking of bread and to the prayers. And then fear came over everyone. Many wonders and signs were being performed through the apostles. And now all the believers were together, and they held all things in common. They sold their possessions and property and distributed to the poor, and distributed the proceeds to all as anyone had a need. Every day they devoted themselves to meeting together in the temple complex, and they broke bread from house to house. They ate their food with a joyful and humble attitude, praising God and having favor with all the people. And every day the Lord added to them those who were being saved. I want you to think about that for a moment, that this way of life was so powerfully attractive to the world in which they were living. Every day people were being added to those who were being saved. And granted, the church was new, it was fresh. The message was fresh, it was encouraging, it was uplifting, it was inclusive, but that message is still the same today. And the world we're living in needs to hear that message as desperately now as it did 2,000 years ago. When the church functions the way the church is designed to function, when we are acting and living as a team, loving one another, encouraging one another, spurring one another on to love and good deeds, the world takes note of those things. Because it is so drastically different from the culture in which they are living in. It is so drastically opposed to what our world says is important. And the other thing the preacher says here in Ecclesiastes is that teamwork produces a greater reward than individual work, and we see that in the early church. Their ability to be of the same mind, even having come from dramatically different places and spaces in life, was a powerful testimony to the power of the gospel. And the same is true for you and I. When we are able to live in community and harmony with one another, no matter where our backgrounds, our upbringings, our experiences have led us through, we have a powerful testimony to the world around us. Think about group projects, Jody had one or two different group projects in her classes, and all of her project partners were sent home. Not because they had the virus, but because someone they'd been in contact with had the virus. And so they were near, so they had to be sent home. And so I think two of her projects, group projects, she was left without partners for. Look, group projects, they require people. And it's easier to do in a group because you have, the motivation to get done. You have the division of labor. But sometimes we're far too content to just fly solo. And I find myself in that space because sometimes teamwork is hard. Sometimes it is really hard to work with people. It's really hard to work with others because I have in my mind an idea about how I want things done. If I bring others into that, they might have a different idea. They might have a different understanding. They might have a different desire. And it takes work for us to put aside those things and say, let's work together and get the best possible outcome. Jesus could have doubled the number of villages and areas that he sent his 72 disciples into if he just would have sent them out as individuals rather than in groups of two. But in Luke chapter 10 and verse 1, he says, after this, the Lord appointed 70 others. He already sent out the two, and he sent them ahead of him in pairs to every town and every place where he himself was about to go. And so you think, it would have been much better, maybe much easier for Jesus to just say, hey, instead of just going to 36 towns and villages, I'm going to send you to 72. But he didn't do that because he recognized the importance of having people working in pairs, being as a part of a team, because we need our brothers, we need our sisters, we need the body to hold us strong. I think I've used this example before, but it's a pretty powerful example. One Clydesdale horse can pull about 8,000 pounds by himself. Now, if you have a big sled that needs to be pulled, you can put two horses together, and if one pulls 8,000, you would think two could pull about 16,000. But two horses together can pull 24,000 pounds, 3 times what one can do. So think about that, and you can look at it and you can say, well, there's a physics aspect of the way two forces can work to increase into more than just the sum of their equal parts. But it's not just about physics, because there is something psychological that transpires in us when we are working alongside of people. When I am at home, I can get some work done when I'm by myself. But when someone is there working with me, my motivation is greater. I have someone there as a partner who's going to help me do the work. The work is easier to do, and we get so much more done, not because two of us can work more, but because I'm a little more motivated when I have a partner who is there with me. Two are better than one. And we see that even in the way Jesus sends out his disciples. The other aspect of being together with one another is simply this: when we fall, we pick one another up. You think about some of the things that have transpired in our lives over the last year or 2 or 3 or 4. Can you imagine going through something like the flood without a church body to be there? Can you imagine going through the kinds of loss that we go through without a brother in Christ to lift you up, to hold you accountable, and to hold you in prayer? He says in chapter 4, verse 10, for if they fall, one will lift up his fellow, but woe to him who is alone. When he falls, he doesn't have another to lift him up. Think about the things that we have to overcome, to stand against. The things that we are facing in our lives today: anxiety, depression, grades, cyber bullying, disease, relationships, death, famine, fires, storms, loss. Can you imagine trying to go through that alone? It is so important that we are there for one another as a team. You'll probably remember Derek Redmond in 1992 in the Olympics. He was a runner from Great Britain, and he tore his hamstring coming around on almost to the home stretch. He didn't think he was going to finish. And then his father comes out of the stands and picks him up and holds him up, and you see him bouncing on one leg as they finish the race. In last place, sure, but he finished the race. No way in the world he could have done that on his own with the injury that he sustained, because teamwork allows us to overcome challenges that just simply seem impossible when we are facing them alone. Ecclesiastes chapter 4 and verse 11, going back to our core text here, he says, again, if two lie together, they keep warm, but how can one keep warm alone? There are harsh elements in weather, in life. We can't weather those elements alone. We will surrender to the elements if we're left to our own devices. But with another person, we can overcome the harshness of the world. We can overcome the harshness of the people, of the life that is around us, because simply life is brutal at times. And at times it seems like it's never going to let up. And maybe that's why we have what we have in Hebrews. The writer of Hebrews in chapter 10, verses 24 through 25 says, and let us be concerned about one another in order to promote love and good works, not staying away from our gatherings as some habitually do, but encouraging each other, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. There's a great importance of being a part of God's people. It can be tempting to give up when things get hard. It can be tempting to lie to ourselves about remaining strong. It's easy to become so secluded and allowing outlets like social media or the news or television or the latest binge-worthy drama to become a comfort. But being in a community with others allows us to encourage one another and stir each other up, to run our race in love and good deeds. In the movie Coach Carter, there's one of his players, Timo, has been excused from the team, and he wants to rejoin the team. But Coach Carter tells him to leave the gym. Says you've got 500 push-ups and running drills that you've got to do. And so his teammate, recognizing that Timo's made a mistake and has come back to the team and is wanting to do the right thing, the team offers to do the workout for him. And they tell the coach, they say, look, the team suffers together and the team triumphs together. And so if our teammate is going to be forced to do this kind of punishment, this kind of discipline, we're going to do it with him. And that's the beautiful thing about a team. We suffer together. We triumph together. We cry together. We rejoice together. We mourn and we praise together. This final phrase the preacher shares in verse 12. A strand of 3 cords is not easily broken. And again, we see this passage primarily associated with weddings, where the threefold cord consists of the bride, the groom, and God. And naturally, marriages are so much stronger when God is intimately woven into that relationship. But the verse in its context is stating the strength of variety over isolation. That when we choose to do life together with others and to be a part of God's team, of God's body, of God's people, of His bride, then we stand a much better opportunity of experiencing victory than running alone. Because the truth is, you are not alone, and we are better together.